Have you ever been exploring out in the wide world that is
Genshin Impact
and thought to yourself,
Wow.
there sure are a lot of abandoned villages. Why is that? All over Teyvat we have vastly different regions, cultures and histories. They all share one thing in common however, the cataclysm. But that can't be all there is to it, right? That was 500 years ago after all. And civilizations in Teyvat have risen and fallen since then too. I mean, Inazuma has just ended a war. Liyue is struggling with an aging populace. Sumeru is kind of uninhabitable. Fontaine is France, and Natlan? So today we'll be investigating each region to find out just how many there are, all while trying to determine the unique circumstances that might have led to each of these villages ending up as they are now. I guess this is kind of like archaeology, but with that genshin impact. Now, Mondstadt is an interesting case. All the other regions have their fair share of abandoned villages, but here, there is evidence of only one past settlement outside of the main city. So what could have happened here? This is certainly one that is particularly puzzling for a few reasons. So, naturally formed footpaths lead into the area, fresh looking cart tracks, common Mondstadt fences that you tend to find outside important crossings and roads. Considering how overgrown everything else is, these should not exist in this sort of pattern if no one has lived here for years. Hello? If no humans have lived here for years, an overgrown forest with boars now inhabiting it and no buildings. The most confusing part of it all though is this central structure and just how intact it is. There's barely any moss or mold. The metal doesn't look rusted at all, and what's more, it looks like the common architecture found in Springvale and Dawn Winery, with the use of wooden stone roof tiles, yet this is the only place where we find this specific structure. Which brings us on to our second reason, the Teyvat timeline. We know that Springvale has survived for at least 300 years thanks to Olaf. However, it's extremely unclear how old it truly is, considering it could have been established at any time since Salvindagnir froze over, and that is super duper ancient times. That still leaves us with a very wide time frame from which this town could have been settled. But there is an important distinction to be made between old and new settlements, and that is stone. Ancient settlements are marked by ruined stone structures, erosion and overgrowth. Places like Salvindagnir, Stormterror's Lair, and the Four Wind Temples, even though these are a bit younger. Ancient Teyvat is represented by a monolithic architecture. You can tell the difference when exploring out in the world because old settlements used primarily one material. The fall of Decorabian was 2,600 years ago-ish, but even though Mondstadt City was established not long after the ruin of Decorabian and incorporates a lot of stone, the building styles are vastly different, likely having evolved over time to represent their newfound values. The architecture we see in Mondstadt City today is open and reflects their freedom. It's also likely that post-cataclysm is when many new buildings and settlements were probably made as a direct result of needing to build after the calamity, giving way to newer styles of building, incorporating a lot more wood into the designs, simpler and not fortified, as a lot of ancient buildings tended to be fortified. All of this provides us with a clear enough distinction between old and new-ish buildings, which also means this structure is probably post-cataclysm. Having said all this, however, there are other counterpoints that throw a wrench into this dilemma. Your Honor, if we take a look at Liyue just for a second as an example, both Dawn Winery and Tianchu Valley existed over 1,000 years ago, yet you wouldn't have thought that just by looking at them. Tianchu Valley is by all regards a typical Teyvat example of an ancient ruin. Large, stone-built, and now mostly abandoned. In contrast, Dawn Winery is still being lived in to this day by, Batman. Just ignore my brother, he likes to brood, and fits with current Mondstadt architecture, being made out of wood and plaster. But where Tianchu was abandoned, Dawn Winery went on, and perhaps over time was rebuilt or repurposed, and the expansion gave way to the houses that we see in its surroundings. Interesting proposition, Mr. Cavalry Captain with no horse. Even then, however, we just loop back around to the same conundrum. There's no way this is 500 years old. My guess, a modern Mondstadt settlement was built on top of ancient Decorabian ruins. The one aching question though is where then are the other buildings? These particular stones we see as we head in seem to act more as markers or cairns. I couldn't really find any examples of it being used this way aside from over a few nearby ruins. Could it just simply be that there used to be a building around this center that has become long since buried and some random Mondstadter just decided to place a bell on top? But wait, what if it wasn't a village at all? Hey, what's that? Oh, that's just the Discord server that you should check out. a site that acted not as a place to live, but perhaps a place to travel to, acting more as a religious site of some kind, hence the lack of buildings around the central point.
Lament!
I actually think the Stone Gate is a good example of a mixture of old and new. Stone Gate? Then where's the gate? Modern Liyue masonry is more uneven and crude when you put it next to ancient stonework. There likely used to be more to this stone structure, but with time and erosion. She said the thing no way. Erosion? Rock? Liyue? Geo? Morax? Eventually more was worn away, and we end up with what we see today. What makes me almost certain that there used to be more here is the cliff and waterline along here. The way the cliffs have formed suggest as much, and we see as we go along piles of rock and rubble at the base, as well as buildings that have long since been abandoned and probably washed away with the weather too. Wuwang Hill's fate is actually one we only very recently finally got answers to in-game during the Lantern Riot. Up until then, there wasn't any clear reason, only folktales from this book. The events of the Lantern Riot basically explained that there was a border incident. Basically, death, or Fita, was leaking out of the boundary between life and death, and Hu Tao's father attempted to burn it away, but instead he failed the riot, died, and this caused the entirety of Wuwang Hill to become flooded and left lasting effects in the area. That actually does explain why there's so much water everywhere too, and why the houses even down here are in ruin. They look like they've basically been swept away, and these weren't just wood and thatch houses. These are the ones you would find in the city or in a wealthier village. I mean, compare that to these two settlements, Mingyun village and the fishing village, both specializing in a trade where the people living there probably aren't bringing in a whole load of mora. Villagers that weren't well off wouldn't have used so much stone. It must have flooded the entirety of this area, because if we head on down further, there are remnants of houses that people must have built on top of the ruins, and they're in the same state as the ones in Wuwang Hill. Another interesting thing of note is this bridge. This road leads to Qingce village, so isn't as traveled by. The other wooden bridges that lead to Liyue Harbor are well taken care of, and the one leading to Mingyun village is falling apart. Most people in this region of Liyue use rafts to get along the waterway. It certainly beats trying to escape with your life by going on foot. Look at the amount of hillochells there are along this route to Qingce village. Excuse me, sir, there's hillochells like literally right behind you. For the longest time, I had thought that these wooden planks placed along the shore here were remains of old houses, which, yes, okay, they still are, but if you look closer, they've actually been crudely placed down to form a hut of sorts by the hillochells nearby. What does confuse me though is the bridge leading into the village. The village can't be older than a couple of decades, and the bridge has practically collapsed already. Why is this? There are a few explanations. One, hillochells purposely breaking it apart to build their huts, but also consider the placement of the bridge. It's right next to the sea, so combine lack of upkeep with harsh weather conditions and it makes sense. It is also quite close to Sao Terre. Now if this played a role, I don't know, but it's something to think about, what with it being where the god of salt died. Mingyun itself abandoned probably only a decade or two ago, especially when we take into consideration the likes of Jichong and the chasm that halted work 2 years ago because of the events in the mines there. It's an old mine, so people abandoned the place once it all dried up. This also fits with the state of the architecture, because the houses are still relatively intact. We'll see more houses as we go further into Liyue at different stages, and you guessed it, the village and quarry was also built on top of ancient ruins. According to lore, the hidden palace domain here was used by the 8 adepts for cultivation, so likely these ruins date back to the Archon War.
But where are those?
Either way, there's a lot of evidence of people having lived here until recently. Carts, tracks, cut wood, notices that are still legible, and very minimal overgrowth. Also interesting interiors of the houses, with no doors on the inside. I have no answers as to what is going on here. The land either side leads nowhere. Also, this house across from it, genuinely no clue how anyone would have accessed it, but it is a lot older than the houses in Mingyun village, so perhaps a lot earlier in time there was a way of getting up here. And now we move over to the west side of Liyue. Juyin Cast is a juicy area. I wouldn't eat that if I were you. And there's some rather clear pieces of evidence that point to why there are so many abandoned settlements here, and so few people in current day Liyue. 1, this region is very far away from civilization and the harbour. 2, it's extremely difficult to traverse and navigate, making survival difficult too. And 3, the overall shift in Liyue as a whole, the age of humans dawning and all that. This is the region of the Adeptus, and with fewer people going to visit or pay respects, eventually the population is going to dwindle. It's the same as with Qingce village, an aging population where all the young people are heading into the city. Just before you cross the water over to the Minlin region, there is this little section. So consider considering the stone looks exactly like the walls we see along the roads and at the guard outposts, I would wager these stone formations acted more as a sort of pit stop or trade outpost. The fishing village just opposite Wangshuin has a time of abandonment around the same as Mingyun village, at least somewhat corroborated by the similarity in the age of the buildings. The architecture is the same as Mingyun village, characterized by the wooden frames and thatch roofing. I don't know who put this in their house, and you can tell this was a fishing village thanks to the plethora of bamboo piers, rafts, and boats. This sign tells us they left the village citing difficulty fishing, but there's plenty of sources of fish. Paimon, please shut up. It's down to location. It's fairly close to Wangshuin and the waterway, but how can they compete against sellers from Liuwa Harbour? There's little evidence of any kind of agriculture, only over at this building, but given how it's elevated seems to have held some importance. Perhaps it was even a communal area of sorts. Allotments, so they did grow some food. Perhaps they might have foraged for food too, as we can find other NPCs around the area doing the same. And this would also explain this underground building that looks like it could have functioned as a storehouse. Then there's more houses if we head further north, because what says safety, like building your own home right next to ancient ruins with ruin guards that might melt you with their lasers? Note the difference in stone again. This house was built on top of ancient ruins and are of higher quality. The landmass and excessive rubble to me indicates potentially a landslide. It is right at the base of the mountains. The state of the buildings are also almost identical to Wuang Hill, another place where a natural disaster occurred. A lot of the settlements being along the shore of Minlin also makes sense, because then you wouldn't have had to tread through hills and mountains, just coast along the waterway to get home. The rest that I could find sort of congregate around the slope and Tianchu Valley, so a few buildings leading from the slope, then we get more development heading up this hill as the path becomes more defined and surrounded by fences on either side. A lot of evidence of recent occupation until a landslide perhaps, again, and another path that leads nowhere.
Wait, what?
Then higher up, the most confusing of all, we've got a lot of wooden planks that could have been bridges or supports that maybe fell off the side of the mountain. If we zoom out, it would have gone all around the face of the mountain. My theory is that this path actually does make sense, and a long time ago there used to be pathways and platforms leading up here in order to access these houses and the top of the mountain. Look right here, it's buried, but you can just about make out another wooden platform, maybe stairs, facing in that direction. The few living people that remain hidden within the foggy mountains are scattered around in a house or two, but that's about it. In southern Liuwa, it's not looking too good either. It's mostly a lot more ancient ruins and a few lone houses. Lumberpick Valley is abandoned due to the events that unfolded in the chasm. This is where the miners would have lived while working there, but since they couldn't work, they either left or turned to the treasure hoarder life, hence why we find treasure hoarders roaming around here now. Oh my god, I'm free from cryo jail!
Oh my god, I can't believe my eyes.
Considering Shenhe's age, this village would not have been abandoned too long ago either. If she's been training with Cloud Retainer for 10 or so years, then we can hazard a guess and say it was around this time period. So her father attempts to sacrifice her. Not long after this, the evil god causes the death of the parents too, causing the rest of the villagers to move away. It's just a whole village with dilapidated buildings and one spotless, mint-conditioned house sitting slap bang in the middle. A very odd picture. So, Liuwa. Most people don't care to live in the Minlin region because they aren't interested in the Adeptus, natural disasters, and outside dangers too. Being so far away, you have no guards for protection. Most of the villages that did exist until recently were trade-specific villages, so were left once mines dried up or resources ran out, and southern Liuwa is just full of bad vibes, like abyss corruption spewing out from the chasm, and evil gods destroying entire towns. All of this contributes to the sheer amount of abandoned settlements that exist in Liuwa. For Inazuma, however, the land of eternity. Yeah, turns out not all villages are eternal. Most of the abandoned villages kind of congregate all together between these two islands, and this makes perfect sense actually, as the middle ground between Narukami Island and Watatsumi. Guys, stop! This isn't you. This is where a majority of the war was taking place. Arguably, abandoned settlements in Inazuma contain the most lore too. In Sumeru and Fontaine, there are a lot of unmarked abandoned villages that are just sort of there. No clear explanation because they don't necessarily fit with the overarching plot of the region. Sit tight everyone, we've got some lore to go over. In order of appearance, right from the beginning. So there's this island right on the border of the Dark Sea called Sarumi, and it was here where the traveler arrived only to find it uninhabited. Except it wasn't, because this child named Ru appeared appeared out of nowhere and brings us to meet the other villagers, and they keep talking about this ritual that they're going to do. And slowly as the traveler and Paimon explore more and more of the island, it becomes clear that there is something much deeper going on. And what's that? Oh, that one's really far away? Like thousands of years? You know what? Let's get a bit closer to present day. Seirai Island, engulfed in lightning, the ancient thunderbird that had once been slain and sealed away by the Raiden Shogun herself. As you'll find out, for pretty much everything in Inazuma, it all leads back to A, because it is a rebellion against the shogunate led by Ako Domeki that started the chain of events that would destroy the very island. Before its destruction, Koseki village was a fishing village. This is where Asase Hibiki, whose lore is tied to Shimenawa's reminiscence, lived, one of the shrine maidens responsible for watching over the seals. But it's during this rebellion, in an attempt to turn the tides, tides because ships on water, to destroy the shogunate's ship, she unsealed the Thunder Manifestation, taking out pretty much everyone with it, which yeah, Ako Domeki's ships are, that's a whole thing. We find out during the second Gapopelago that their fleet got swept away to there, so technically the ship we're using belongs to Ako Domeki. This ultimately turned Seirai Island into what it is today. Everything changed when the Vision Hunt Decree attacked. Ow ow owie. A settlement in its own right, built around the Mikage furnace that harvests dead god remains. Yeah, the people from Watatsumi didn't like that too much. What with it being Watatsumi's dead god that got sliced up by Raiden and is now being harvested. So one fateful day, as the Vision Hunt Decree is underway and Watatsumi are rebelling, a fight takes place between their forces and the shogunates. Unbeknownst to Kokomi, undercover Fatui agent, this guy, Nathan, teams up with extremist Orobashi worshippers to destroy the Orobashi wards that are sealing its power. The furnace becomes overloaded with all the energy from the Tatarigami and malfunctions, having to be closed off by this giant force field. But I mean, even before the malfunction, I wouldn't have said living here is safe, like, at all. It's giving Sumeru City walk out of your house and fall to your doom vibes. Higi Village is a perfect example of the byproduct of this ongoing war. Many of the people living here had already been forced to flee because of it, but even more so, they had to contend with a dead god curse being released upon the land. So after the release of the Tatarigami, Jokotsu Mine was abandoned first, and Higi Village was overwhelmed with refugees, slowly running out of food until presumably there was no more, and one by one people were starting to lose their minds, attacking one another, until the village head also goes crazy and starts sacrificing people. So if you didn't die from the war, you most certainly would have from this. All of the abandoned villages we come across in Inazuma, bar a single one, have been abandoned recently and as a direct result of the conflict. This also makes sense as to why the houses are still in fairly good shape. Just as Inazuma's housing situation is affected by the war, Sumeru's is the environment as a whole. The amount of abandoned settlements is concerning, but not surprising, considering just how uninhabitable the region is outside of the main city. Crocodiles, tigers, fungi, Aranara, unpredictable weather, the withering. There are only a few houses in this region, which is rather interesting. Consider for a moment how, aside from the waterway going from Sumeru City to Port Ormos, this route is probably the second most important, economically speaking. A lot of trade goes this way, so it's surprising that there isn't a civilization that has built up around the palace. Especially this little settlement, because it's basically just an extension of Sumeru City. Just a small river crossing and you're basically there. The few houses there are here are pretty much in ruin or occupied by eremites. Who's a good son to beast? The fact that there's a stray dog here would imply it was abandoned recently. However, the amount of overgrowth in such a short time period conflicts with this a bit. The climate would speed decay up, but this much? But maybe it's just Sumeru things and nature grows incredibly fast and unpredictably. The forests of Sumeru sure seem like they have minds of their own. There is a withering spot nearby too, so perhaps in the past it could have covered much more land. The academia only places guards in areas they deem important, and this academic culture is also part of the problem. If the governing body is centering all their decisions around what most benefits the academia, it leaves no room for settlements outside of the city. This causes a lot of people to migrate to Sumeru City too, because that's where the opportunities are. I would wager the only reason a place like Vimara Village has survived is due to its position along the waterway that leads to Port Ormos, so they get plenty of trade and are safer because of the amount of activity, but even then the academia provides them with no protection, so they have to rely on the forest rangers. Most settlements outside of the city would lack resources. Eremites, on the other hand, know how to survive in the Sumeria wilderness. Many of them make a living as escorts and bodyguards exactly because your average Sumeria NPC doesn't know how to navigate it, let alone survive. So you have people fleeing or abandoning their homes, and they then get occupied by groups of Eremites. Speaking of Eremites, this is quite a significant settlement. 8 houses in total. Could be the largest village outside of Vimara. You've got ample space to grow food, so we know that the ground is fertile. Oh, that's your garden? Ah, that can't be why this place was left to the elements, or in this case treasure hoarders and Eremites. One such explanation is the unpredictable weather, being so close to the Varuna contraption, but even then, there's easy access to the river, and it's along the mainland route that leads to Port Ormos, so would have plenty of foot traffic and trade. These 2 houses in this outpost are still intact. They even had a watchtower. Well, there could be a cause, and it has to do with the Withering again. A Withering spawned here, right on the outskirts of the village, so they had no choice but to evacuate, but they couldn't escape to Port Ormos. They were cut off. So what did they do? They headed for Sumeria City. As time went on, nature kinda did its thing too. These ones, landslide or flooding is likely given the rubble and houses being buried under, and these ones, tree roots have grown into the side of the buildings. Yeah, see, this is exactly what I mean. All you could be doing is going for a stroll 1 minute, minding your own business, and a giant boulder could fall on top of you. It's just wild that there's literally no information on these houses in Apalm Woods. No NPCs living in the area, aside from enemies. The architectural design going on here is a sort of in-between of current day Sumeria houses and the Aranara ones. We've never come across any evidence that the Aranara live in the thatched houses, but these ones, human architecture is similar enough that they probably took direct inspiration from the Aranara. The Aranara Radish house, for instance. A few things that share characteristics with these little ones. The doors, same shape and material. And some of the Radish houses also have these little wooden tendril things on top. These ones incorporate only wood and leaves, whereas human houses have evolved to include thatch and other stuff. So only a few houses in this region could belong to humans, and I don't even want to know how they would get up there. Okay, Sumeria definitely has the most abandoned settlements. It also has a lot of precariously shaped cliffs, and people that decided the best place to live would be right on top of said cliffs. Yeah, what we had in mind when building these houses was very much open concept, airy, in tune with nature, to be able to step out of your house and be greeted with everything Sumeria has to offer. So we've got 3 sets of settlements along this stretch, right next to Caravan Rabat. This one sitting right on the edge of a cliff. The houses in a state that indicate exactly what I was talking about. Being near a rocky cliff, uneven terrain, a landslide could well have caused the buildings to become submerged or crushed, the rest succumbing to the harsh environment of the rainforest, eventually collapsing. This one isn't abandoned. The buildings are still in use, but I like to imagine that the people living here are just trapped in these houses and can't leave because there are hilichurls right outside. However, hilichurls are the least of our concern. This settlement isn't much better than the one further up, and will likely suffer the same fate. Your neighbours are literally ruin guards. This village used to have a Withering right on top of it, so we can surmise that that is what caused it to become abandoned. But I think even if a Withering area hadn't spawned, the ruin guards or hilichurls would have done the job for it. There are a few more in the northern part of the region, so I'm not sure you want to be living right next to that. The rest of the small villages along here are a mixture of collapsed and intact houses. I'm not even going to go into this one. One here, 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 and here. As for the desert, the people that live here are either nomadic or live in old Deshret era ruins, so there aren't really villages or settlements in this regard. But of note are some Aru village style houses scattered around the lower Setek region, long since abandoned and worn down by the sandstorms, possibly because they were too far away from Aru village and a reliable water source. Yeah, so anyway, Fontaine.
Melusine's
Fontaine has a lot of water. Its situation is a bit different compared to Sumeria because they're sort of running out of land. And again, flooding, natural disasters, leading to mass migration to, you guessed it, the capital city. What little land they do have, houses aren't being built on them. Much of Fontaine's abandoned settlements are squished into one region, Elenus. Look at the way everything surrounding the circle is leaning back, almost like it exploded and absolutely decimated the houses that were on top, and now is just a crater with constant abyssal corruption leaking out. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. No, Elenus, it's not your fault, okay? I know you just wanted to make friends. But look at just how destructive this was. Barely even the walls remain. There is one standing house if we head over here, right next to another house that is missing most of its house ness. So either the one still standing is of a younger age, or if we look closer, the house still standing is elevated, so another possibility is that this one just narrowly avoided a flood. Speaking of floods, sorry Liam, we're not here for you today. At first I was kind of stumped as to what could have caused an entire village to be wiped out, especially when it isn't particularly close to water level. The Iranese region was having problems with green corruption goop, so it could have been that when I noticed this. If Fontaine's problem is that water levels are continually rising, what do you think is going to happen when you have a massive sinkhole that connects to an underwater cavern system right in the middle of your village? Yeah, water is going to explode out of that. This would explain the goop that used to be here and its surroundings. Not just the buildings, but the way the trees are sort of bent away from the water source. Fontaine has a very clear problem that it needs to face up to, because outside of the main city, they only have two tiny villages here, if you can even call them that. Poisson, that is one flood away from being destroyed itself, and this. One teyvat nuclear disaster after another in this region. It's rather confusing too that the island with the most important building on it has practically no people living there. A region plagued by natural disaster after natural disaster. Fontaine is bogged down by needless bureaucracy, making it even harder to get anything done. You can say goodbye to getting a house built here.
No way, bro!
Something I do like about Natlan is what they decided to do with the world. It's very different to the other regions, where all the others had one sort of main hub. Natlan isn't city-centric. Nope. Giving each tribe a home base helps the region itself feel much more alive. And while there are areas that a small amount of people have settled in, I wouldn't really class the places we find outside of the tribes as villages or settlements per se. A lot of people in Natlan outside the main settlements also use tents rather than buildings. We've got Saurian centers, outposts, strategic defenses, and trade posts. So people in Natlan are quite mobile and likely move from place to place a lot, especially places like the Flower Feather Clan. We also can't classify any of them as abandoned, because human enemies in Natlan are in a different category to other regions. They're all tribe warriors that belong to that specific tribe, and they fight and defend Natlan. This is just a difference in culture really. Therefore, they aren't enemies in the traditional sense. The only reason they attack us while exploring is likely gameplay reasons, and even then they don't attack on sight. Natlan just doesn't have the same kind of problems in comparison to other nations in teyvat. Even in a time of relative peace and prosperity, there is still a lot of death, destruction, and decay. A lot of what was once rebuilt after the cataclysm has since fallen to ruin. Regions change, people change, but I will say, with the direction the Archon quest has been taking us, into a new dawn of the human age without reliance on gods, Liyue is governing itself, Inazuma's war has ceased, the Academia's control over the people minimized, and Fontaine's prophecy is no more.
The prophecy.
Yes. What has been prophesied will be fulfilled. It seems things could be starting to change for the better, and this should hopefully translate into prosperity for the people and more civilization outside of the capitals.